Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Thank you for coming and social distancing yourselves. Really debated whether we should keep this or not, and we're kind of on the cusp of a lot of tough decision making right now, I guess. So thank you for taking the time to come and listen to how kids are doing in this state and in the area. I'm Jennifer Bertram. I'm from Children's Defense Fund, Minnesota, Kids Count Coordinator. So this is my third round of Kids Count data books. Second time actually writing it myself, so all errors are mine, and there are errors, and I apologize for that. I think we'll get started. Today we're going to talk about census as well, because a lot of the data that we use in our data book at the Minnesota level, but also at the national level, really relies on census data or census population counts so that we can determine rates and percentages of children who are affected by a number of different things. So keep that in mind as we go. So Children's Defense Fund is a national organization, and we're one of only 8 state and regional offices of this organization that was founded by Marian Wright Edelman in 1973, following some work that she did in the civil rights movement. She's actually stepped down, and we're in the process of identifying who will be our national leader at this point. She's still very much involved, but wanted to take a bigger role in doing some writing and some movement building and really trying to address child poverty. So no one can really replace Marian Wright Edelman, but we'll see who gets to fill those shoes soon. At our national office, we have some recent publications. Over the last several months, they've updated their Ending Child Poverty Now report, so you can find that at childrensdefense.org, that goes into a number of policy proposals for addressing child poverty that we could make change in Congress. And then Protect Children Not Guns is another publication that they updated at our national office level, focusing heavily on how to address our gun violence challenges in this country. At the local level, we do some legislative advocacy work. We have a new policy director, Deb Fitzpatrick, who came to us from the University of Minnesota, who has already for several years been working on paid family leave with us and some other things. So she was able to jump right in and get started, which is great. And I'll give you a little bit of a legislative update in a little while. And then research kind of centers around our Kids Count work. Our outreach work, Bridge to Benefits, is an online tool that people can use to identify public programs that they may be eligible for and gives information on how to apply. And we're in the process of hiring for that position, our outreach coordinator position right now. Our Voices and Choices Coalition, led by our community engagement director, Melo Soso, focuses on ways to address achievement gaps and challenges facing children of color, particularly from prenatal to age 8. And then our youth leadership team works with a number of partner programs, including Osseo, on our summer and after-school Freedom School programs. We're facing some challenges with funding with those programs, with some losses due to changes in decision-making of the 21st century federal grants. So looking at really trying to address some of those shortages, because these programs are wonderful, and I can barely go anywhere in public. When I tell people I'm from Children's Defense Fund, they say, oh, my child went to a freedom school 12 years ago, and we still love the songs, and we still, think fondly about how much it affected our families. So really great programming. And then Beat the Odds. We're supposed to have our Beat the Odds Awards dinner next week. We'll see if that happens or if we are going to have to postpone it. We're still trying to figure that out in light of coronavirus. But we select 5 young people every year who have overcome great challenges and are headed to college. Give them a scholarship and a laptop and a few bundles of things to help them get started on the right foot. So it's a nice evening to celebrate them and celebrate what they do and where they're headed. And hopefully we will be able to do that. We'll see. So As Kids Count is a national project of the Annie E. Casey Foundation, they put together their own data book every year and rank states according to an index of 16 indicators. And Minnesota consistently ranks very high compared to our peers across the country. But we always kind of temper that news with the fact that we really need to look at disaggregated data and look at how all of our children are doing in Minnesota. And when a number of our middle class children, our white children, are doing exceptionally well, we have a lot of challenges facing some of our children of color and our low-income children and our American Indian children. And that's what we really try to dig into in our local work here, to make sure that we understand the needs of all of the children that live here. So fourth overall, we notched up a little bit in education this year, a little bit up in economic well-being, stayed about the same in our other two areas. And like I said, Minnesota is a traditionally, historically white majority state, still is, but we have a growing diverse population, and we really need to understand the needs of all of the people who live here to make sure that we can continue to be an exceptionally healthy state. So looking at how we can further disaggregate our data and make sure that we understand the needs of all of our children. Kids Count Data Center. So that is a product of the National Kids Count project as well, and there are national groups that update data indicators on the data center, and then we also update our own indicators on there. And I'm working with my interns to do a huge upload right now. We're a little behind in some of our work. We've been very short-staffed for a few years now, and trying to keep that up to date is a big project. So I'm working on it, but hopefully soon we will have all of our indicators updated to the most recent year. And there's well over 100 indicators there, and it goes back to 2000, I think it goes all the way back to. So if you're really looking at long-term trends, data is available at the county level, congressional district level, state level, wherever we do have it available to us. So it's a nice resource. It's really user-friendly, even if you're not, a data geek like me, and you can create little maps and charts and things like that. So kind of fun and helpful for us in planning. So every year with the data book, we put together some type of a theme to tell a story about what the data is telling us. And this year we really needed to focus on census, and I wanted to figure out how to discuss why the census is important for us in terms of looking at data and thinking about children's well-being. So we know that a growing percentage of children are receiving public benefits, and we have almost 40% of children in Minnesota who are receiving medical assistance. So we want to make sure that if we have significant portions of our children who are accessing public benefits, that our systems are supporting their needs and adapting to make sure that they work for everyone. The census is open now. You can sign up online, get your household registered. Part of the reason why Kids Count is so invested in this and interested in this is that we rely so heavily on census data for measuring child well-being, and that children are one of the categories of undercounted individuals, particularly children under the age of 5, which is the people you guys are all very interested in. Also, stacked on top of that is if you're a child with immigrants for parents, if you're a child who lives in a rental property, if you're a racial minority, if you're low income, if your family experiences homelessness, then it's even harder for children to be counted. And interestingly enough, a lot of children who are not counted on the census historically actually were living in households where they did complete the census form, and they happened to leave children off. So there's a number of organizations and groups that are doing some hard work around conducting outreach to people around the census, because we really do want to make sure that all children are counted for a variety of reasons. A complete count really helps us use accurate data to distribute federal dollars. We get over $15 billion from the federal government every year to fund all of our programs that serve children and families. State government uses population distribution to decide where to send state dollars. County and city governments use it as well. School districts, where to keep schools and where to staff up, where are the children. So it's really critically important for the census to identify where the young children are living so that they can be prepared for the number of children who will be entering their preschool and kindergarten programs. Businesses decide where to locate their stores, their warehouses, things like that, based on population estimates, based on where they think they can have enough people to employ. And then us. And then we are at risk of losing potentially one of our 8 congressional seats, which would be a pretty big deal. We've held on to it for the last couple of decades, but if we do, we'll squeak by, and it might be a matter of between 6,000 and 18,000 people of a difference. And we're competing with California, which invested $150 million in outreach for census work to make sure that all of their people are counted. So we got to all work really hard to make sure. In 2010, it's estimated that about 2% of our children under age 5 were not counted, which doesn't sound like a huge amount in a state of over 5 million people. But if you think about that, about $2,800 is sent back to Minnesota from the federal government every year per person. And over 10 years, that's $28,000 per person. So if you do the math, that's about $200 million over 10 years that those 7,105 children who weren't counted didn't receive in terms of funding coming back to the state in the form of programs for health care and education and roads and housing support, energy assistance, all kinds of things. So these two count, and so do all those other children. One of my coworkers said that she was going to just fill out all 7,000 names on her census form. Don't do that. Don't do that. We'll just do good outreach and we'll make sure. So as I was saying, new research has shown that young children are more likely to be missed in the census if they live with single parents or young parents who may not have answered the census before, don't really understand the importance of it. If they're not the biological or adopted child of the householder, if it's kind of an informal living arrangement or a foster care situation, they live with multiple generational family members. Maybe they don't put the whole, everyone who's living there. If they're renting, particularly if they may be violating a lease because they have too many people living in that household, the census doesn't care about that. They're not looking at lease violations and they're not sharing any information. They just want to make sure we know how many people actually live in this country. So I already mentioned the congressional seat that we could potentially lose, also funding allocation shortfalls, but also just inaccurate data driving our decision making for over 10 years. And 10 years is a long time in the life of a child, right? If we've got a 3-year-old in one of our preschool programs right now, they're going to be 13 the next time this rolls around. That's their whole elementary and part of their middle school. So we really want to think about the significance of this. So some of the outreach work that I've been doing has been convened by the Minnesota Census Mobilization Partnership that the Minnesota Council on Foundations has been spearheading. There is a state complete count committee, but there's about 300 local complete count committees scattered throughout the state that are focused on outreach activities to their geographic areas. There may be one up here, I'm not sure, but there's a map on, yep, Dave's saying yes. Children's Defense Fund Minnesota is a complete count committee. We're focused on counting all children, so I'll go into a few of the things that I'm working on. Just to make sure that we have people that are really focused on relational organizing and understanding the needs of people in their communities to be able to communicate the critical importance of responding to the census. So our official census day is April 1, and although you'll be getting postcards starting now, we really need to think about April 1 as kind of that benchmark. So that's why snowbirds, it's an interesting count process for them who may move back on April 1 from Florida or Arizona or wherever they're staying in the winter. So they get to decide if they want to count themselves in Minnesota or elsewhere. And I think for people who are highly mobile, we really use that benchmark as April 1. Where did you sleep on April 1 if families share custody, things like that. The census is still recruiting for enumerator positions. They're paying $27.50 an hour in Hennepin County, and you can work for only 5 hours a week if that's what you have. Those people help the census collect census forms from households who did not fill it out independently, or who may have filled out something that there's a question and needs to be responded to. So, and they especially want people who actually live in the community and know the area. So if you can also spread the word there. And just people, we need to make sure that people know their rights, that this is highly protected information. It's not shared with any other government entity. It's highly protected by the Census Bureau. Violation is punishable by 5 years in jail and $250,000 fine, up to those limits. And so they take it very seriously, and so do we. And our Attorney General, Keith Ellison, is taking it very seriously too, and he's on watch. He has sent staff to a lot of our census meetings to make sure that we, that if anything fishy comes up, that we're addressing it. So I feel pretty confident. Everyone counts. Babies count. Young children count. Make sure those babies are put on the census forms, because we need funding for them too. And I brought a few copies of the We Count book that was produced by a national organization and tested on working with families and young children to really identify what are the different types of family groups and how do we count them in the census. So it's a great resource for early childhood educators to share information with families. And there's some online worksheets and posters and things that you can print out to accompany those as well. So if you have a school or a program in your area that you think would benefit from that, if you'd like to take one or two, I have limited quantities, but I'm happy to share some. There's a lot of resources specific to young children and children on the census.gov website as well that people can print out. So that's another place where we can, but we have also understood that just posting up a flyer isn't going to quite do it, especially with children where, as I said, there are a lot of nuances in counting children and making sure that children who live in multi-generational households or informal living situations are counted. So we need to have those conversations as well. And this is a coloring book that the Statistics in Schools Census Bureau program put together. There's a whole number of things available for statistics in schools at the preschool level now. They weren't available last round, but there's also a cute little song that I'm not going to play for you because it'll be in your head all day, but you've heard it? Yes? There you go. I just did it again, didn't I? And now it's in your head. But it's catchy, and there's some Sesame Street resources that have just been released, some PSAs that Count Von Count is doing, and some other materials that you can access on Sesame Workshop. So a lot of national groups are invested in this and making sure people count. So here's just a little peek at what the form looks like, but you can fill it out online, and if you don't want to do that, you can fill it out by paper or you can call the Census Bureau. All right, so on to data. Throughout the data book, I put together a few North Star highlights, I called them this year, programs, groups that are using data to inform practices. And we know that Governor Walz and Lieutenant Governor Flanagan are very interested in making sure that children are doing well in our state, and they've kind of reinvigorated the Children's Cabinet that is a part of the governor's office. And my predecessor, Stephanie Hoganson, actually got recruited to go be the policy director at the Children's Cabinet. So we work pretty closely with them, given that Peggy Flanagan used to be our executive director, and now Stephanie used to be our policy director, or our outreach director. So we're really pleased to hear that the Children's Cabinet is taking a front and center role at convening almost all of the agency heads across the state of Minnesota to put children's needs at the front and center of what is being decided across agencies. So this year I organized the data book according to systems that support child well-being, so early childhood, K-12, health, financial, mental health, and child welfare. So a 2-page spread is devoted to each of those, and I know early childhood is of highest importance of interest to this group, and I know you're well aware that we have a number of different types of programs that serve early childhood, but not enough slots to go around and not enough funding to make sure that all children get access to what they need to have a high quality early childhood education. And I'll go into a little bit of some of our legislative work that's aiming to address some of those funding shortages, but we really think we need a mixed delivery system, a system that isn't a one-size-fits-all, but that serves the needs of all of our children in a variety of ways to make sure that people have a good start. We're working to increase the Child Care Assistance Program provider reimbursement rates right now. That's the one piece that we haven't achieved in terms of complying with our National Child Care Development Block Grant. So we are actually facing some sanctions if we don't get that under control this time around. So I'll talk about that in Kids Can't Wait a minute. Making sure that the types of programs that we have to offer families are culturally relevant and appropriate for children of color and American Indian children. And then the Office of Legislative Auditors report from about 1.5 years ago really looked at about 7 programs in depth, but it identified over 43 programs that served young children, and was looking to see if there was some way to streamline some of those offerings and make them a little more easily accessible for families. On K-12, I'll just highlight that looking at 4-year graduation rates, if we look at English language learners, special education students, and students eligible for free and reduced lunch, each of those groups is about 20 percentage points lower in the 4-year graduation rate than their peers. So addressing some of those needs early and all through their education can help them achieve that 4-year graduation rate. I will say that for special education students, sometimes it's better for them to stay in school for an extra year or two to receive some additional supportive services for transitioning to adulthood. So maybe that's not necessarily a bad thing, and if we see that tick up a little bit more in 5-year and 6-year graduation rates, that's okay. Homeless students by far the lowest rate of graduation at 47%. So really need to address the needs of children who are experiencing homelessness, both with the family but also youth who experience homelessness on their own, and make sure we get them through school. Some of our policy recommendations for this set is increasing funding for after-school and summer programs. I mentioned a little earlier that even our Freedom Schools programs are facing some significant cuts due to some shortages in funding for that area, and we know that after-school and summer programs serve as childcare for families who need to work, but also serve as academic enrichment for children who may be falling behind. So that dual purpose is really really critically important to make sure that we get that children have access to those. Expanding funding for full-service community schools that can help improve attendance. It's been shown that those types of schools that have kind of a one-stop shop where people are able to access a number of services all under one roof, improves attendance, improves families' engagement with the school, and overall satisfaction with academic progress. And then we're working with some partners on investing in programs that attract and retain more teachers of color. I always ask people to think about how old they were when they had a teacher of color. A lot of people say college. I was in 4th grade, actually. I had a Native American male teacher in 4th grade. And I didn't think about it at the time because I was in 4th grade, but but now I think back, I'm like, well, that was pretty cool. And he was one of the best teachers. He was known to be one of the best teachers in my little small hometown. But I think with our growing diverse population in Minnesota, we want to make sure that the population of teachers who teach our children reflect the diversity of the children in the schools too. And then special education services. I know that a lot of districts are having to subsidize special education costs with some of their per pupil allotment, which makes it harder to serve all their children and all their needs. So making sure that we have adequate special education funds for those needs. So moving into our financial systems, we know that even extra $1,000 a year, or as Andrew Yang proposed, a month, that would even be nicer, wouldn't it? Can really help families address their basic needs and make sure that they can provide for their families, and has a major impact on family well-being. And I like to point out that the federal poverty level is sort of artificially low, because I think when it was originally proposed, it was meant to be more of like a living wage type of measurement. You know, if you're below the poverty level, you can't really meet all of your family's basic needs. Now, if you're under the poverty level, you're having some major challenges in even addressing housing for by itself. So I like to use the living wage calculator. There's an online tool with the Department of Employment and Economic Development, where you can look at counties and regions, and you can play with it with family size and things like that, and it looks at what's the average cost of childcare in that area, what's the average cost of housing for that size family, and other basic needs, and then what would it take to actually have a living wage to be able to pay for all of those basic needs. And so at the statewide level, it's estimated at about $86,000 for a living wage for a family of 4. In Hennepin County alone, it's more like $100,000. So we know a lot of families who aren't making $100,000, right? So even when you look at 250% of poverty, we have 38% of our kids living under 250% of poverty, which is, I don't know, about $60,000. So again, really significant number of our children whose families can't meet their basic needs. And so some of our ideas that we have to help address some of those financial needs. We did have a success in the legislature last year with increasing the Family Investment Program cash grant that hadn't been increased for 30-some years, since 1986. So across the board, starting in February this year, everyone would receive an extra $100 in their monthly benefit. But unfortunately, that meant, in the way that the law was written, it meant that if you got that extra cash, then your SNAP benefit, your food support benefit, would go down. And all the smart people at DHS were trying to figure out, like, how can we make it so that their SNAP benefit doesn't go down by more than $100, because that would be a net loss, right? So I'm not sure how it's all playing out yet, because it's only March, we're only 1 month in, but the idea was, let's hope that everybody at least gets some kind of a bump up in their combination of their MFIP cash grant and their SNAP benefits. But there's some push in the legislature this year to add a cost of living adjustment every year with the MFIP program, so that we don't have to keep trying to go back and increase it. Because even that $100, if you think about over those 33 years, cost of living went up by a lot more than that, right? Okay, paid family leave. I'll talk about that in my legislative update in a minute. Our state child tax credit, we have the working family credit at the state level, but adding a child tax credit would go even further to helping support families to meet their children's basic needs. And then there's a lot of talk too about affordable housing, which is a problem everywhere in the state. So I know that there are some proposals at the legislature with the bonding bill to invest in some affordable housing opportunities, because that's a huge chunk of people's paychecks right now, and the mark is that people shouldn't have to pay more than 30% of their income on housing, and I think a lot of people are paying more like 60-70%, and that leaves not very much left for other things. In our health systems, we see Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act of 2013, to be a huge success in increasing the number of children enrolled. Minnesota has traditionally done pretty well in having a low uninsured rate anyway, even before that, because of the Children's Health Insurance Program and some kind of interesting options that Minnesota proposed way back in the day. But we see a sharp increase in the number of children who are insured by medical assistance because we are one of the states that expanded eligibility as a result of the Affordable Care Act. And then a drop in Minnesota Care because people were then able to enroll in medical assistance. So we have an overall about 2.5% to 3% uninsured rate in Minnesota. We're watching that closely because we're hearing a lot of anecdotal evidence that some people are choosing to unenroll from programs if they fear retribution from ICE or other law enforcement. And we do see some disparities with our Latino families anyway, about a 7% lower rate of insured children than most of their other peers, and then American Indian children sharply lower as well. So we're watching those, and we think we really need to address some of those challenges facing children who are uninsured, and especially right now in light of what's happening with coronavirus. It's a good time to think about public health and the importance of having everyone have access to care. And maybe that will be a silver lining of this outbreak. We need to address our racial and ethnic disparities in access to coverage and care. We know even for people who are insured, sometimes they can have challenges getting access, particularly dental care, because a lot of dentists can really limit the number of children and families that they're willing to take who are receiving medical assistance. Did you have a question?
When you were talking about the census, did you say 40% of Minnesota children are on?
Yeah, it's right about 38 to 40% average monthly enrollment. Mm-hmm. Increasing funding for family home visiting programs. We know that those programs are very rich in providing support to families for their early childhood education needs, but also for health needs, identifying challenges early and making sure people have access. And then, as I was starting to say, the dental care. There are a lot of children who aren't getting basic dental care because they can't find a provider who's willing to take medical assistance because of the lower reimbursement rates. And a lot of dental practices are small businesses, so they can't absorb those costs as easily as maybe a huge health system like Park Nicollet. So I know there are groups that are trying to identify how to deal with that. Mental health, I'm working on getting access to some mental health data, and there are some efforts at the state level and at DHS. They received a SAMHSA grant to look at how to make their data more accessible to better understand the needs of children, because anecdotally I think we know that we have a lot of children experiencing some major stress and needs for mental health care. One of the successes that we've seen in the legislature recent years, we have expanding access to school-linked mental health programs. So 287 school districts out of, I think I counted 339 about. So it'd be great to have this program in all of our districts, serving almost 15,000 children, and almost half of those children had never accessed mental health care before. So having a mental health care provider embedded in a school where children can, go once a week, it eliminates the need for transportation, and it connects the child's provider to their, the people who know them well, their teachers and administrators, and helps enhance their mental health needs. I think it's a really great program. So for mental health policy recommendations, I went straight to the source for ideas, which was Sue Abderholden, who's the executive director of NAMI Minnesota, and someone who I look up to very well on all of the amazing work that she and her group are doing in terms of advancing mental health services and supports to children and families and individuals in our state. We have federal funding available for early childhood mental health screening and intervention, but it doesn't go far enough to serving all the needs of children and families, so establishing some state dollars would help enhance that availability and really get at the needs of young children early on. Expanding access to mobile crisis response and stabilization services. I've heard of some programs having to shut down because of lack of funding, and that's a bad idea, because when people are in crisis, they can't wait 3 weeks to get into a program. They need to have some support right now. So making sure that we have access throughout the state with stable funding is really important. Broadening access for children's mental health, especially for children who speak other languages and children from various cultures. We know there's a shortage of providers of psychiatry and therapy in our state, so trying to make sure that we have adequate providers in our state. Also, mental health parity is the law, but it's somehow being skirted by large insurance companies who have fancy lawyers who figured out how to develop a loophole. So the way mental health parity is supposed to work is that if you go to a therapist, you're supposed to pay your office visit copay, not your specialist visit copay. But a lot of programs are charging the specialist visit copay. So trying to figure out how we can change the law and strengthen it so that those private insurance companies can't do that would really go a long way towards expanding access and making it more affordable for families. And then making sure that we have access in rural areas as well. Telepsychiatry and teletherapy is starting to become more prevalent, and so that can help expand access. For child welfare, there's a lot of discussions at the legislature about what to do about the disparities in placement for American Indian children and African American children. There's a legislative task force that met a week ago, and it's meeting again tomorrow to discuss some opportunities for adapting practice and improving care for children. The leading cause of out-of-home care, as we've suspected for a couple years, but now it is truly showing up in the data, is parental drug abuse. The opioid addiction issues that we're hearing about is definitely taking its toll on children and families in this state. So previously, alleged neglect has been the highest frequency of cases for child protection. But I think the Family First Prevention Services Act that was passed in Congress in 2018 actually could really help address both the disparities in out-of-home placement, but also the challenges facing families to be able to access services without having to be put in out-of-home placement. So up to this point, the federal dollars that the state can access to get services and supports to children in the child protection system had to be used only if you put a child in out-of-home care. So now, as Minnesota works to adapt the law and implement the Family First Prevention Services Act, we'll be able to access those federal dollars while maintaining a child in the home and providing services and supports to families, keeping the families intact, while also prioritizing safety. So if children are at risk of harm, we definitely want to still use all of the spectrum of services and supports available to the child protection system, but really looking at how we can try to maintain those family relationships while also providing support and services. I think that it will really go a long way towards improving care. And the National Policy Director for Children's Defense Fund, Mary Lee Allen, passed away last summer suddenly with cancer, but she was really integral in creating that new law and put a lot of thought into that over her 40 years of working with Children's Defense Fund. So they actually renamed part of the child protection law in Congress after Mary Lee Allen, knowing that her contribution to policy around child protection for the last several decades has really been integrally envisioned by her leadership. So with child protection, Governor Dayton had a task force on child protection in 2015 that made 93 recommendations to improve the system. The legislative task force has been looking at all of those recommendations over the past several years and making incremental changes and improvements, but we'll continue to look at those and adapt our laws and infuse funding to be able to better address the needs of children and families. Looking at how we can implement that Family First Act will go a long way towards hopefully improving care. Governor Walz had a task force on housing that identified goals and recommendations for increasing affordable and stable housing. So looking at some of those and then targeting our high poverty areas with investments to make sure that all children feel safe and have access to more stabilized communities. All right, how are we doing for time? Okay, so the Kids Can't Wait Coalition is co-led by the Children's Defense Fund and is focused primarily on the Child Care Assistance Program, which had a lot of challenges in the past legislative session that I won't go into now. But I think we're over the hump there. The Department of Human Services has worked really hard to implement some program integrity tools to better address some of the issues facing that program that were in the news a little bit. And we're hoping that we can, our real goal is to fully fund and forecast the Child Care Assistance Program so that all eligible families who need access to child care can receive it. But I think our immediate goal for this year is to just get us into compliance with the federal Child Care Development Block Grant so that we can avoid sanctions, and then we can also increase the provider rate reimbursement. So the amount of money that the CCAP program pays to providers for caring for children. Right now, we're just hoping that we get it to 25% of the current market rate survey. So right now it's based on the 2011 market, right? The 2011 survey, which is a long time ago, and we were hoping to get to 75%, but it's not looking good in this session. So we're going to just try to get into compliance with the federal requirements, and we'll keep pushing in coming years. But House File 1 that was introduced last year is getting another hearing today in the Jobs Finance Committee in the House, and next week will be in the Education Finance Committee. So there is some movement across House, Senate, and the governor's office to get us into compliance. So let's hope we make it over the line this year. Paid family and medical leave, we're proposing a new program that would be housed in the Department of Employment and Economic Development to provide up to 12 weeks of partial wage replacement for qualifying cases if people need to take family medical leave. So right now, the Federal Family Medical Leave Act allows you to take unpaid leave, but that's really not, it's not really an option for a lot of people who need that paycheck. So this would be an insurance program kind of like unemployment, where the employee and the employer would both contribute 0.31% of a paycheck to a pool, and those funds would grow so that people can start to access them when they need them, if they have a new baby or if they have some kind of a health care need for themselves or their family. So last week the House passed the bill. It's been through multiple committees in the House over the last year, and it did receive a a vote in the full House. We're looking for a hearing in the Senate in the Jobs Committee. We haven't seen much movement yet in the Senate. We know that the governor's office is watching this closely too and very interested in it. So we're hoping that some of the wonky changes that the committee has been working on over the interim between sessions will help advance this. We really think that the United States is one of the only countries in the world that does not have this, and we need to get it together. There's some movement at the national level too for the Family Act, a similar proposal. So we'll see if Minnesota can get it done first or the national group will get it done. We'll see. And I needed to update this slide, but this is a new pilot grant program that is being proposed in the legislature to just have 2 different counties be able to offer grants to 3 programs each for early childhood that would enable them to serve a child with a disability. And they're keeping it very vague right now. So it could be a child with a physical disability, so, you know, installing a ramp or installing, you know, some type of equipment that would enable them to be able to provide for a child with a disability. Or it could be mental health needs and get additional training to be able to understand how to better serve those families or that child. Or any number of things, have some sensory things for children with autism. The idea is that a lot of children with special needs have a hard time finding childcare. Families have a hard time finding childcare for them because there are providers who don't feel equipped to be able to handle their needs. So this would be a very small pilot grant program that would just see if that would be adequate, giving some resources and some support to providers to be able to feel more equipped and be more equipped to provide care. So hearings have been held in both bodies, in the House and the Senate, and are looking at inclusion in the overall omnibus bill. So it would be a 2-year grant program, and then we'd kind of reflect after that and see how it goes. The Community Solutions Grant Program, that was something that we worked on over several years to invest money in communities of color, recognizing that people know their community, they know what their needs are, and if they had access to resources to be able to address them, they could do it adequately and creatively. So we received $4 million last legislative session over 4 years, and then when Minnesota received the federal preschool development grant, $26 million over 3 years. Some funds from that preschool development grant are also going to be used for this Community Solutions Grant Program. So the first RFP did go out and it's been closed. So we're waiting to hear the announcement of who will receive those initial funds. Excuse me, and Los Osseo is sitting on the advisory group so that we can look at how it's being implemented at the Department of Health to make sure that the intent of the program is really being reflected in how the decisions are being made in terms of those grants. So I'm excited to hear about what we're going to see come out of those programs.
Do you know when there's going to be announcements?
I'm hoping any day, because I know May reviewed a number of the grant proposals and has submitted her decision making. So I think they're at the point of ranking them, and hopefully we'll see some results in the next couple weeks. Did groups up here apply? Do we know of any groups that? Yeah. Watch your news. One success from last legislative session is that we expanded eligibility for the Working Family Credit, our state program, to add a 3rd tier. So previously it was if you had 1 child, you got a certain amount. If you had 2 children or more, you got a certain amount. Now now a 3rd tier is 3 or more children. So recognizing that having a 3rd child does add to the cost of your family budget. It also increased income thresholds across the chart and increased the amount of funding that people receive. So what we're hoping is that we'll see a number of young people who don't have dependents become eligible, because previously I think if you earned anything above minimum wage, you really weren't going to be eligible for it. So increasing those income thresholds will hopefully see some additional funds back in people's pockets. So that's kind of my legislative update. So just always want to say, make sure you're following us. You can join our email list by going to our website at cdf-mn.org. You can follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and apparently we're reviving our Instagram now, so check that out too. And make sure that you guys know what children need in your area. Make sure you're in touch with your legislators and keeping up with what's happening and what we need for our children and families. So I can answer some questions now. You guys have some? Any clarifications? Anything I don't have in the data book that you want? Yes?
I was just, can I put in a plug for Advocacy for Children Day?
Yes, I should have done that. Yes, go ahead.
March 26th, where there's going to be a day on the hill for young children. There's going to be a rally in the morning and a briefing in the afternoon. So, it's a good time to come.
It's a great day. I know, we were talking about that yesterday too. We don't know if it'll still happen. We don't know if we want that many people convening in the Capitol. But it's always a great day. It's been going on for years, and it's a fun day where a lot of ECFE programs bring the kids and parents come, and there's really fun, family-friendly activities, and a lot of energy around making sure children get what they need. So, yes.
You can find out by, are you pushing anything out?
Yeah, May is on the committee too,
Okay.
so I'm sure we will put it up on Facebook, Twitter, but.
Yeah, and I can give you I have an email list too that pushes out stuff.
Does it have a website? Does it have its own website? I can't remember now.
Eventbrite. But I think United Way was going to put something on their website, maybe.
Were they? You can email me if you. I'll be able to get access to details. I just can't remember where it's posted right now.
Good question.
Yes. How do we find out more? That's a really good question. Anything else? No? We're thinking this year about having maybe a compressed data book with a voter guide, because it's also an election year, people. Have you heard? So thinking about when we're making decisions about our elected officials, because all our House of Representatives are up, right? And a lot of local decision making is done by our elected officials. So we need to think about the whole ticket, and we're also talking about how do we infuse judges into this? What are some of the issues we need to think about with school board members and things like that? So so I guess next year I'll be talking about what happened in the election following, but I think we're going to be doing some voter engagement stuff in the coming months. Once we get past the census. Thank you, guys.